I think it is time to move on to another call. So we have another theist caller, who is Japheth in Singapore,
Yes,
and would like
yes.
to discuss divine command ethics. Japheth, how can we
Hi,
help?
hi. Is my voice clear?
Yes, we can hear you great. Go for it.
Okay. So basically, I'm a Christian, and I believe in divine command ethics, and I believe the Bible is inerrant. And I want to correct that. There are many theists that argue in objective morality. Actually, from I've read the Bible from cover to cover, and I would say there is no objective morality. So I hold to a legislative view of ethics. So, yeah.
That was my first thing when you brought up divine command theory, was to say that I take that to be a subjective metaethical thesis, and you agree.
God is being subjective and just making up his
Katy,
mind.
I don't want to. Yeah, you go ahead first here, because I the motor mouth.
Well, so Japheth, is your argument that like there isn't objective morality because God does what the hell he wants?
Yeah, I'm actually here to agree with you.
Okay, yeah, because that's interesting. I guess that if God's just making up what's moral and what's not, and I'm just making up what's moral and what's not, to the same level, like why should I listen to God when I can justify why I think something like gay marriage is good, and God has absolutely no reason to oppose it?
Yeah. So basically, and the Bible does teach that God created creation for His pleasure, and the purpose of mankind is to fear God and keep His commandment. So basically, yes, we have the choice not to obey Him, but the punishment is hell. So in that sense, we have free will to go ahead.
So you were saying that the argument here is my decision on what's moral, yeah, cool. God's decision on what's moral, yeah, cool. But the difference is when I tell you why something is good and why you should do it, and I argue it reasonably, I'm not going to torture you forever, whereas God is going to torture you forever. So it doesn't matter if I can explain my position better. You're just simply going to agree with God because he's way more scary than I am. Is that like your position?
Yeah, basically it's the most powerful being in reality. And the good news is I happen to be an open theist. So God's moral system actually does evolve. So the future does not exist. So the idea that
does that mean like convince God?
But,
like is God convincible?
Repeat that again.
Is God convincible? Like, can I change God's mind? Because if God's moral position can evolve, God must be.
Change God's mind.
God must have made a rule. So do you think God made a rule at some point and then punished people for not obeying it, and then changed his mind, and then no longer punish people, or?
So basically, God creates the laws, and those who are close to God are able maybe to influence him in some way, if suppose God were to change his law in the future. So basically, God is the government. The morality, even though it's subjective, we ought to obey them to avoid punishment.
So do you think though that doesn't, I mean, if I just accept that, I think that makes God a massive dickhead. Like God has all this power, and he's basically just making it up as he goes along, and he's changing his mind all over the place because he's got no justification for what he's doing, and he's just infinitely torturing people for stuff that he agrees he might be wrong about. Like if he's changed his mind in the past, then maybe he's going to change his mind again on something that he's decided to do the worst possible imaginable torture for. Like that is such a dick move. I am very judgmental of anyone who is in that situation. Like you must agree that, I mean, maybe you don't want to say it out loud because you fear God, and his current rule set is if you don't believe in him and fear him, then you're going to go to hell. But like, I think that clearly makes him a bad person. God, like he's awful.
I can concede that. Yeah, I concede that God is a celestial dictator, and many theists wouldn't say that out. And those who really take the Bible seriously would have to admit God is a celestial dictator. But on the other hand, so God created creation because he is a personal agent that wants interaction with conscious, with us humans who can think. So if we please him, then everything is well. So we are created to please him.
Well, everything's well for you. It's not everything is well because
Huh?
God has created all kinds of horrible things, including eternal torture. And he's just like, lol, I'm just going to torture this person forever for no reason. Because I just changed my mind on a whim.
God the Father sent
He
Jesus
doesn't need
Christ
reasoning.
to uphold the law. I mean, to demonstrate his righteousness that he
Yeah, but what I'm saying is God has like made up what he thinks is good and bad, and he can change his mind at any point, and he's changed his mind before, and he doesn't even have reasons for it. He just
the notion of righteousness could just change to something opposite.
Yeah, he can do, like, he doesn't need any justification at all. I mean, imagine if he said tomorrow, having the name Japheth is morally bad, or having ever had it, and all those people are going to go to hell.
I would change my name. If you ask me to change my name, I would change my name.
But people who've ever had it, there's no forgiveness for this new rule that I've made up.
Okay, I'm really concerned because it sounds like you're really letting yourself be a slave to whatever it says.
Yeah.
But I got like two things I'm really curious about. One, do you think it logically follows that because you said that it's powerful and therefore we ought? Do you think that it logically follows to point out like descriptive characteristics of God, and then therefore someone ought to follow that thing? Because I'm not understanding why anyone ought to follow something because it's powerful. It doesn't.
I think you could maybe if you keep that reasoning and you say, oh, we should follow that because it's powerful, then what if your government told you to disobey something that you thought was good? If your government starts doing slavery or it starts doing a genocide or something, you're just going to be like, oh, well, it's powerful, so I should follow it.
Well, I'm not going to disobey God for the sake of the government.
No, but if the government doesn't disagree with God, but it wants to do something immoral,
I think really he wants to say that it's whatever the most powerful thing is, we should be in accord with.
But if God doesn't have an opinion, God doesn't have an opinion on some things. God doesn't, like in the Bible, it doesn't mention trans people at all. And if your government's like, we're going to wipe out trans people by taking away the healthcare, we're not going to murder them, and we're not going to do what other punishments that God says is bad, we're not going to steal from them, but what we are going to do is take away the healthcare. What I would say is that's immoral. God says, I don't care. The government says, well, this is what we want to do, and they're more powerful than me. So I could explain why it's bad, but you're just going to say, well, they're more powerful, so I don't care if it's bad or good.
Yeah.
Is that your position?
Okay. I'm cautious about obeying human authorities, but for God, I'm more...
human authorities, God, you're saying that the reason you obey a God is because, you're scared of God. Fair enough, whatever. But if you're scared of the human and like situation too, the human authority, why, what's the problem with obeying it? They're threatening you too. The humans are saying, oh, we're going to torture you and then kill you unless you do this. And God's like, well, I don't care about this one. Sorry, say that again?
God commands me to love other people. God commands me to love other people. So if the government tells me to do bad thing to other people, I wouldn't do that. So Mike mentioned a point.
But I think that's kind of dodging it. I mean, there are some things that you can do and claim it's loving. I mean, lots of people think that the rubbish they're doing is loving. I mean, who's to say what's loving? And if God hasn't given you a clear commandment on a certain moral situation to say what's the most loving thing to do, then all you've really got is you've got the government or some kind of power, or like a man standing behind you with a gun telling you to do something, and they just have the power. You've got no moral command from God. You're saying, well, I now agree with this person because they've got the power. And I'm saying that
I think you would do the same thing too, right? If somebody points a gun at you, I think
I guess I would have to think to try and conjure up some moral situation where that might not be the case. But maybe if it isn't so extreme, but like the most powerful, I mean, maybe they're going to put you in prison for doing something that they've just decided is bad. And you personally think it's immoral, but God hasn't got an opinion on it. You're going to have to do what they say, and you're just going to agree that it's It's a good thing to do.
I haven't
Yeah,
talked
because
about it yet. I think okay.
what Japheth, what the issue is how you, like, if I want to know something's wrong, like with the last caller, like my access is going to be dependent on my experience with other people, myself, how I know to feel pain, pleasure, and certain types of emotions, and then in conjunction with other people, and then recognizing that I care about what other people think, and that's not going to be the case for everybody, obviously. But there's going to be reasons that I point to, or some type of like adjudication process of why I think that's the case. But if God is your moral like authority, how exactly do you have access to him? You know, I know you would use the Bible in one case, but if he just changes his mind on a moral proposition and says, you know, like Katie said, having your name Japheth, or having, you know, be Christian, and he just decides actually everybody that's loving it's wrong, it's the wrong way to go about it. How would you actually have access to the updated change in the moral system? Right? Because there are two issues. One, how the hell do you even have access to this deity in the first place, which I want to ask you more specifically in a minute. But two, when it's updated, like assuming the God exists in this case, how would you even know? What is it that you're in accord with to know that God has updated it? Does he speak to you?
Okay. I have personal encounters with God, and in regards, if God changes his law, for example, Jesus came.
Okay. Sorry, Japheth. Sorry, I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm really sorry, but you said God. You did say God communicates with you, and then anything after that, I'm not really interested in yet. Right?
Sometimes, like giving a vision. It's not verbally. It's giving a vision.
Well, I know, but if God communicates with you because now you're giving me some access into how you know it would be updated, right? But now the next question is, how do you know that's God? Right? How have you ruled out other things?
Devil.
In line with the Bible.
No, but it won't be in line with the Bible. God makes up a new rule. Let's say God makes up a new rule, and he says that dogs are evil, and you should slaughter every single dog you see, and this is the command from God. And he comes down. It's in clashing with the Bible, and he tells you that in a vision, and you're like, right, this is what God wants. I'm going to go killing all the dogs, and then when you die and you go to meet God, and he's like, mate, that wasn't me, that was the devil. How do you know the difference between God talking to you and just like you having an LSD trip and the devil talking to you?
I don't know how to explain this, but God's manifestation in my life is quite powerful, more than a lot of Christians actually. So I can know which is a holy commandment, which is not.
How do you know?
Yeah, but how would you know? Because the point that Katie's bringing up is that a successful deception is going to be what? Successful, right? That's exactly what a successful deception would look like. It would have you looking at all the things in the world and saying, this is actually exactly what God meant. Well, that's exactly what a successful deception would look like. So how do you rule it out?
Maybe you've only been deceived so far. Maybe only the devil has talked to you so far, and that's your only experience of communicating with a supernatural being.
Okay.
Especially if it disagrees with the Bible. Sorry, say again.
Yeah, just how do you know? How do you know it's God? How have you ruled out a successful deception?
Well, for one, I look at the evidence, and I happen to be a young Earth creationist, and
well, the evidence is not in your favor there, bud. I'm sorry, I hate to break it to you. Do you know what geological strata is? Have you looked at that?
Mate, you need to do some.
I'm not going to defend that. Sure. I consider that. Okay.
Yeah.
But you did just point to it as evidence, and if like 3 seconds of just saying one thing makes you back out of it, like, look, me and Katie, we're gonna go off the show, we're gonna eat dinner, we're gonna have whatever, but this is something that's gonna reside with you, right? It doesn't reside with us. And if the first thing that you say is that you point to the evidence, but you immediately take your hands off it like it's a hot stove, right? It burns you really quickly. I mean, you might not want to go back to the hot stove, right? You might want to go somewhere else. You might want to find something, go back to the drawing board.
And if that's an example of something that God has told you, and we know that's false, I mean, you have been successfully deceived because it doesn't specifically say it in the Bible. And if God's told you this, I mean,
okay,
maybe your knowledge of this is deception.
Okay, so what is the question? You mentioned a question just now. How do
Yeah,
I?
how do you? Oh, sorry.
How do you know? How do you know if you've been deceived or not? I guess
Let
that's
me
all,
answer that question first. Let me answer that question first.
Sure.
So, in the Bible, whenever God wants to institute a new law, like Moses received the law, or when Jesus came to give the new covenant, right? God will display a massive miracle on the planet. So at least to the people around. So it will be unmistakable if God were to actually to give me a new law. There will be some kind of miracle that only the Creator can do.
Well, what about Jews that disagree with that progression towards the New Testament? Right?
Sorry?
Yeah, but like that just
there's
assumes
obviously
that's the way. There's a
on what-
disagreement. There's people that don't think Jesus is the Messiah, and they use the same source as you. They start at the same place in a lot of ways.
So
right?
what that means is there was people who agreed, and they all saw a miracle. They all saw Moses, and they're like, "Wow, this is a miracle. The laws have changed." And then another miracle happened, which was Jesus turning up and saying the laws have changed again. And half the people were like, "Nah, this isn't a big enough miracle." And the other half were like, "Oh, this is a big enough miracle." And then you could say another miracle came along, and that was when Joseph Smith found his magic stones, and then he was like, "The moral laws have changed again. Mormonism is true." And loads of people were like, "No, it's not a big enough miracle." And the other people were like, "Yeah, it is." So when another miracle comes along, how are you know? How are you?
Okay,
obviously, people.
Basically,
Sorry?
it's obeying whoever is the most powerful. So it just simplifies the process.
When you see whoever's the most powerful, I mean, like if a new person comes along and they're like the head of the United States military or something, and they're like, "I've just witnessed this miracle and it's all powerful and it's amazing," and some people are like, "Nah, this is rubbish. He's a fraud," like Joseph Smith. Then uh, they're more powerful. I mean, are you just going to believe them? It's like Mormonism is like an extra piece on the top of Christianity. Why don't you believe in the miracle of Joseph Smith being able to magically read like a new language? Is it just because he wasn't powerful?
The reasons, for one, Mormonism, I think, contradicts too much of the Old Testament and the New Testament.
But God can do that. God can just turn up and make new moral laws. And they did a big miracle, and loads of people around it attest to it and believe it. And that was like a world-changing miracle. And God just can change any moral law he likes without any explanation.
Yeah, you don't realize that
you believe in Mormonism.
Yeah, you don't realize that your kind of principle that you're invoking here is gonna have a cost. Right, it's gonna have a cost.
I just think you should be a Mormon.
Because you're not going to be able to adjudicate any of these as an actual deception or as the actual word of Yahweh, right? And that's before we get into looking at the text and then you assuming the interpretation that you take actually aligns with what God intended. Well, guess what? There's a bunch of Christians that have different denominations that don't agree on the interpretations, and they all disagree with what God intended by the verse. And so even before we get to that issue, which I think is like the biggest issue for any belief based on scripture, and no one can actually know what the speaker meant, your case is that you've introduced this kind of principle that by parity of reasoning, you would have no epistemic access to know whether or not you're being deceived or not, because everything that's going to be ruled with what you take in your moral position, that it can be changed and updated, which will be easier, right? For some like a Christian in this case is going to be like, no, the word stays the same. I know it's God through that. And you can still apply deception issues, but with yours, it's like you've allowed this ability for things to change. Justice could be the standard. A lack of justice could be the standard. Not believing in God could be the standard, just determined by God. And so now it's like just that principle is going to have like theological costs for you, right? It's like you're making a move, you're making a chess move that's going to end up in your defeat later. It's kind of the way that I'm looking at this.
Okay.
And I'm not saying between us, I'm just saying for yourself, right? Like I said, you're going to have to think about this, not me.
Yeah, you got a reason.
Related. If the Christian God is true, will you believe him? Will you obey him?
So there's two questions that are asked there too. One thing I want to say before that just addressed nothing of what me or Katy had said the whole time.
Yeah.
But I like you, Japheth, and so
yeah,
you're well spoken and you're calm and you
you're
listen, and I appreciate
what
that.
we're saying.
And you're considering what we're saying. I appreciate that. So I will answer that. One, if the Christian God exists, then yeah, I believe the proposition is true. The question is, and I'm very firm on this, would I worship him? No, I would not. Have you read the Bible? Right? I've taken several different interpretations that could be consistent with God's intentions, and I like none of them. Right? I'd rather go somewhere for eternity away from that thing. That sounds like a win to me in the situation where that thing exists. Where's the flight, or where's the elevator the opposite way? Right?
So
That's where I want to go.
I reckon I might have recently changed position on this, because I think, obviously, I agree that if God was true and I saw convincing evidence, then I'd believe. Would I worship? So I would, for a long time, I would have said no, because the Christian God, for example, is horrific and has done so many horrible and abhorrent things, like creating a hell and punishing and torturing people forever just for not following the rules or not believing. And I think that's so immoral that I wouldn't want to be part of that. But if I go to hell, I'm assuming that that is not a place where we can successfully organize. However, if I convince God that I believe in him, then maybe I can go to heaven and hang out with all these cool people, and I can stage a revolution, and eventually we can destroy God.
I thought about that, but the problem is with heaven is that they limit your free will, because if you talk to Christians in this and they want to say that evil exists because we have to have the choice, a very important choice of evil and good. Well, in heaven, you can only choose good for most Christians that believe that. And so you wouldn't actually be able to go against God then, because when you go to heaven, they revoke a very significant part of your free will.
God can change his mind at any point. And so when God changes his mind in heaven, obviously that has to propagate out at some kind of speed. And maybe it's the speed of light, because that's the fastest information can travel. So that means there's actually a differential inside heaven, at which point two parts have some kind of disagreement, and you might be able to pick where you are at a certain time to make a decision, and then you could escape, and you could do some kind of coming out the matrix because you've asked a question.
Or you can make it with Japheth's. Sorry, Japheth, that we're doing this, but we could do it with Japheth, and I apologize to you, but if it's the God that Japheth believes in, then it could just change its mind, and then you could be able to overturn it, because that's what the moral ought should be, right?
That's true.
Yeah, it's like the Constitution of the United States. It's rarely, it can be changed, but it requires a very deliberate process. And when God the Father sent Jesus Christ to die for the sins of the world, Jesus as the Creator suffered a lot. So God treasures him.
No, he didn't. He didn't suffer. What are you talking about? He literally was offered 3 days of torture, and you're the king of everybody for fucking ever. Forever. Or who doesn't take that? You telling me you ask 1,000 people on the street, one person's not going to take the gig where they can rule everybody and then be all powerful, remove the experience that they ever even had, of pain, right? You could do that, right? Come on. I mean, what is significant about sending yourself for things that you created? Right? I don't get that. It's like sending a robot. I developed AI and I give it, I did this with Katy, the flamethrower 9000. Why did you arm it with the flamethrower, right?
and especially if you're the one who's invented torture, and then you don't even give yourself the worst torture. It's mate, we've seen what you can do. We've seen what's going on in your sick mind, and I feel like you took the easy way out. But I think we might have to end the call there, unfortunately, Japheth. I have really enjoyed talking to you, and it'd be great if you could call back in when either me or Mike are next on, because it's an interesting position that you take, at least, and I think it's quite an honest one from where you stand. So I hope you've had to learn some stuff from this conversation.
Can I give a final a summary? So basically, the idea. I mean, the things about slavery in the Old Testament, it is no longer mentioned in the New Testament. I think because there is a moral evolution.
We're going to talk forever if you get into the slavery thing. Well, I don't want to be put in a bad mood.
Back with that.
One thing that really
that would be a good discussion.
It'd be a good discussion. It's one thing that really bothers me is seeing people revoke their own compassion for humans by defending this. And so I don't want to get into that now if that's where you're going to go. So
yeah, do a summary, and then we can talk to you about that next time.
The benefit, of this. Okay.
Yeah, and Japheth, we appreciate it. By the way, let me ask you just one quick question, if you don't mind. Because I know Singapore is 4 main languages. Do you mind if I ask you what your native language is? I'm just really interested in those things, so I'm just curious.
English, Well, yeah.
Oh, so would you speak another language? I'm just really curious.
I can speak Mandarin.
Mandarin? Okay, I was wondering because I thought Mandarin was popular. Okay, so I'm just curious. There's some small little. I'm interested in those things. So appreciate it, Japheth.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Japheth. Definitely call back. That's good
Bye-bye.
to hear. But yeah, I think I do like the callers who, that you get these classic people who call in and they try and do all their little apologisms and weave in and out and stuff. But when someone's just like, yeah, mate, just believe God because he's scary and just like changes his mind all the time and I'll just do what he says. It's like, well, that's honest. I appreciate that.
Well, that's why I was kind of thrown off with I agree. Divine command theory is subjective. I'm like, okay, I usually have to get through that hump with a lot of people. So, but I definitely appreciate acknowledging that that's entirely subjective. So.